To them, the topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to spend some time in this first hour here talking about finances and the economy, but we'll also, of course, be watching what will be taking place tonight as they count the votes in Indiana. That will actually push Donald Trump forward, or maybe slow that opportunity to get the requisite 1237 delegates. And so this is going to be a night both for Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. One will be happy, one probably will not. Indiana may not make or break a campaign, but probably will. And we'll certainly have a lot more information tomorrow, and that's what we'll cover here on Point of View. While we're waiting, of course, to see how people in the Hoosier State vote, we did want to talk a little bit about the economy. And today, even Wall Street Journal, ending America's slow growth tailspin. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what we see in the stock market. And if you are certainly looking at your finances and wondering what the future holds, I think you're really going to appreciate this program. And as always, we're going to give you a chance to call in with your comments or questions. We once again bring back to the microphone here Jerry Tuma, who is a certified financial planner, president and founder of Cornerstone Financial Services, graduate of the University of Texas at Arlington. Let me issue, of course, the disclaimer we always do. Even though he is the founder and president of Cornerstone Financial Services, which is a registered investment advisory firm, of course, the material in the program is really intended more for general information and should not be taken as specific investment. So, Jerry, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, Kirby, it's a pleasure being back with you again today.
You know, let's for a minute talk about the campaign. The one thing the stock market does not like, the one thing that businesses do not like, is uncertainty.
Right.
And we still have a fair amount of uncertainty. And even if indeed we know that the two candidates are Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, or if they're Hillary Clinton and maybe for some way in which Ted Cruz gets the nomination, but that uncertainty kind of causes a lot of businesses and investors to sort of wait and see. Is that what you see?
It does, especially as you get closer to the election. I think when you get into July, August, and the conventions and all that start, then it's going to cause people to think a little bit more, oh gosh, what's going to happen, or how is it going to affect me, or what are they going to do? And it always creates the uncertainty in an election year, and that tends to cause people not to, maybe they want to hire, maybe they want to wait and see what's going to happen. It creates all sorts of uncertainty, so it just kind of puts people on hold, if you will. And that's not a great recipe for growth, especially, well, gosh, this year. I'm like, you talk about uncertainty. You and I were talking before we went on the break. I'm like, would you ever have believed that we're going to end up with these two choices, bad or worse, you know? And I'm not sure, I'm not sure which one's the worst in this case. It's like, you've got to be kidding me.
I still wish we had Bernie Sanders just to watch your hair turn different colors.
But no, that probably set my hair on fire.
Who would have expected that you would have had a socialist? In fact, it's quite possible that Bernie Sanders will win Indiana. Now, again, we all know that the presumptive nominee is Hillary Clinton, but it's still amazing to me that he is still racking up votes. And I think it says something about the fact that as you look at some of the statistics coming down, the millennial generation are not sure that they really believe in a free enterprise system.
No, they've been schooled in socialism. You know, one of my friends, Michael Cox, runs the Michael Cox School of Business at Southern Methodist University down the pike here. Basically said, you know, he gets these students that come in. He said, all they've been taught is socialism in the public schools. He said, William O'Neill, who's the founder of Investors Business Daily, which is kind of the investment version of Wall Street.
These are kind of the who's who people.
Yeah, he came up there and he said that he asked the students a series of questions. They couldn't answer a simple economics 101 question. So he used to be called the prophet of boom. Now he's very pessimistic about our future simply because of what's going on in the schools, the way they're training everybody. And boy, you can tell the way the political situation's turned right now. America's at a major crossroads, and I'm still one of those. I hold out that eventually God's going to take care of this. I think we're going to need another great awakening to do it.
I would agree.
Massive amounts of reformation and revival to take place. But at the same time, that's, I use an analogy a lot of times, Kirby. I talk about, good to great, be brutally honest in our assessment of our current reality, unwavering faith, we prevail in the end, out of the book From Good to Great, one of the best I've ever seen. But bottom line is, I do have a lot of optimism about America in the long run, but I do have a lot of concerns that I think a lot more problems are going to hit us, and in many ways it could be worse than what we've seen so far.
I just mentioned Jerry Tuma is also the author of From Boom to Bust and Smart Money, to mention a few of his books. And we have posted on the website here something we've made available before, and it will link you, of course, to the Cornerstone Report, and it's called the 216 Year in Preview. Of course, there's another one called The Start of the Bear, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But the point that you make, and I think we might just educate some of our listeners, since we've picked up 4 new radio stations, at least since you've been on last time.
Okay.
So there are a lot of people that are saying, okay, who is this guy? You have really tried to look at some of these longer term trends. If I could use the term demographic trends.
Right.
And as a result, you've been much more accurate in predicting what might happen in not only the long run, but the short run, because most individuals do not see the evidence right before their very eyes. And that is, you have a baby boom and a baby bust.
Right.
And when you follow that and add that to the other economic indicators, you found some things that other people have never found.
Absolutely true. And this is a great article, by the way, by John Cochran of the Hoover Institute, a great free market economic institute. Ending America's slow growth tailspin. He rightfully points out, he said, here we are with a 0.5 GDP growth last week for the first quarter.
It's terrible.
The Groundhog Day repetition of dashed hopes. It's been that way since since we started this thing in 2009 when Obama took over. So the issue is we've continued to have very slow growth. But the funny thing is, Kirby, as we were talking about before the show started, I never hear what I consider to be the 2 primary causes of this brought out. The 2 primary causes in my mind are, number one, we had a huge debt bubble and people are still deleveraging. They're still paying off bad real estate loans. They're still underwater on some sections of the country. Commercial loans still haven't worked all the way out of the system. And, humans, Americans, consumers are saving more, trying to pay their old debts off. Why? Because they went on a giant party and over-levered in the 90s and the 2000s. And you got to pay that off. So there's deleveraging, and there's also the demographics that you mentioned, which of course, you've written a book on as well. Mm-hmm. But the demographics are very simple, and we always say demographics are destiny. And the issue is that we have fewer and fewer people right now due to the policies that our federal government set when they said abortion is legal. We have fewer people that are in their primary spending age right now. So it's not a secular stagnation like Summers would say, meaning long term we're going to be stagnant forever. It's a demographic winter. But demographic winter is followed by demographic spring, which is coming after this as the baby boomers kids, the echo boomers or millennials get into the system. So I do have a lot of hope for the long run, but at the same time, a lot of the old stuff's going to have to just go away. He brings out in here, we got the entitlement problem could be solved, but it's not being solved. The regulations, small businesses, every survey you see on small business, and by the way, every textbook, everything you ever see about small businesses, that is the source of real economic job growth. It doesn't come from big companies. It comes from small businesses. And again, their issue is regulation and taxation. So the bottom line is we got a lot of stuff to be fixed. But the good news is God's on our side.
Well, again, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get a little more into some of these economic issues. What does it mean to you and to your family? And again, many of you have investments or savings or retirement or all sorts of things, and this is one of the reasons why we like to talk about this from time to time. And also, are we in the midst of a bear market? Well, the traditional definition, no. The realistic definition that you're going to get from Jerry Tuma is yes. And so what does that mean for you and your investments? And also, as we're talking about some of these regulations, that makes a difference because we're going to have one candidate, I think, that believes we need even more regulations. The other one that probably believes we need a whole lot less. And that's going to play out in the election. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Two news stories about Obamacare came to very different conclusions. United Health, the largest health insurer in America, announced that it was pulling out of Obamacare due to mounting financial losses. At the same time, the Department of Health and Human Services released a report boasting about how Obamacare. The decision by United Health is not surprising. While it is the largest health insurer in the United States, it is not one of the largest players in the Obamacare market. Much of its business comes from offering plans to employers. Nevertheless, it currently covers about 750,000 Obamacare customers. Back when Affordable Care Act was being debated, critics warned that we were attempting to fix a broken health care system by piling more regulations and requirements on top of it. The bill added pages of regulations, subsidies, exchanges, and coverage mandates. Critics warned that people would eventually be paying more for less coverage, and that is what has happened. You wouldn't know that if you read the latest government report that claimed that Obamacare has made health care more affordable. It claims that there is only an 8% increase in the average premium after shopping. Dr. Merrill Matthews says those last two words are significant. Millions of people in the exchange were hit with unaffordable premium increases and had to find something they could afford. So they shifted from a more expensive silver plan to a less expensive bronze plan, or chose a plan with a much higher deductible, or settled for a plan with a much more narrow network of physicians. Some may have done all three. Today we have higher health care costs, less coverage, higher deductibles, and more narrow networks of doctors. Taxpayers and insurance customers should demand a better system than Obamacare. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Point of View. Truth Team 360.
I've called in before, and I just wanted to say again what a great show this is. And if all Christians would listen to Point of View, I mean, you can get an education just from listening to the show. It's awesome, and I really appreciate everything you guys do.
At my church, I'm the public affairs representative. I obtain information about political affairs that are going on. I just wanted to say thank you for your programs. I listen to you every day, and you're really my inspiration to do what I do at my church. I feel capable, mostly from what I learned from your programs.
Just wanted to know how much I appreciate your program. I've been listening to it for several years, and thank you so much for the positions you take, most of all for the wisdom you exhibit, and just keep up the good work.
I just really appreciate your program, and I tell people about it all the time. But because of your program, now I've been thinking about attending seminary for some years, and anyway, I started attending VES, Veritas, with Norm Geisler and those guys, and about a third of the way done with a Master of Arts in Theology, and it's I owe you great credit for that.
So I've been listening to y'all for years. I'm not a politico whatsoever. I believe in voting, yes. But if it weren't for y'all, I wouldn't know how to vote. I'm serious. I wouldn't know the first thing about voting, but I do now.
Point of View. Truth Team 360.
A few of the comments we played last week from our Truth Team 360 week. And again, we call it Truth Team 360 because for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, you can actually support this ministry and become part of the Truth Team. If you do so, one of the things we love to send to you as our welcome gift is this MP3 Bible stick. It's from the Ministry of Faith Comes by Hearing. It has the entire New Testament in this little player that's about the size of a pack of gum. It has everything from Matthew all the way to the book of Revelation, music, sound effects, all sorts of voices. You put it in your ears. You can fast forward to what you want to hear. And again, so many people, Jerry Tuma, especially these young people, you got grandchildren, they're always listening with things in their ear. Might as well be listening to the Word of God. It'd be a great present. For those of you who want to give it a higher level, of course, there are all sorts of other options as well. And you can go to our website, pointofview.net, and click on the button there that says Truth Team 360, join our team, and you can see some of the various welcome gifts we make available to you. And a few of you yesterday said, I didn't have a chance to participate last week, and did so. So again, wanted to mention that today, because we are a listener-supported program, and if you can indeed support this ministry, even a one-time gift would be greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to talk to somebody, maybe you would not have access to a computer and like to actually talk to someone and get a little more information about that, our pledge line number is 800-347-5151. Jerry Tuma with us, and you know how important it is to raise support for various radio stations. You've done share-a-thons, I've done share-a-thons, and of course we also are talking about Truth Team 360.
And that's true, Kirby. And those of you that are familiar with us, or some of you may not be familiar with us, I've been associated with this ministry since 1987. So that's a long time. I think you may have preceded me by a few months. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is, the theme that was on my heart when we talked about, giving a little bit today is the comment of stewardship. Yes. In the parable of the talents, he talks about managing your money, investing, and that's absolutely true. But at the same time, I think there's an application that you can use for stewardship. Say, but how well are they stewarding your donation dollars? The word says it's more cheerful. Jesus said more cheerful or more blessed to give than receive. It also talks about a cheerful giver. And the issue here is I know this ministry inside out. I've been around it a long time, and I can tell you, I can't think of another ministry out there that does a better job of stewarding the assets that you give. So you want to know, your money multiplies here. It multiplies into the hearts and the lives of thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people around the country. And where else are we going to turn the country around? The only way we turn the country around is one heart at a time, one mind at a time, transforming those minds. And Kirby, I know that's what you do best. And I'm going to give you one more kudo that I thought of this morning. All of this, when you're coming out of the armpit of humanism, Berkeley, California, that is a miracle in and of itself. So the fact is, because you understand that side of it better than anybody I know, I would just really encourage people to donate to Point of View.
Well, I appreciate that. Again, if you'd like to know a little bit more, we have links on our website, first of all, to the Cornerstone report that Jerry Tuma's put together. Now, again, make sure you got enough paper in your printer if you print it out, because it's going to take you about 12 pages just on that one. If you print some of the others, it will take you quite a few. And you might want to do it on a color printer, because then you can see the graphs and charts and see some of the things that he's educating you about. And, of course, also as you go to the website, you can join with us at Truth Team 360. Just click on that button that says Join the Team. Let's come back to this article that today was in the Wall Street Journal, written by John Cochran, as you said, at Stanford University's Hoover Institute. And he talks about some of the reasons why we would like... Well, we've never had 3% growth under this president, and we've always had at least 3% growth under every president up until now.
Yeah, we've had.
But if you had that level of growth, he's saying if you could double what we have right now, you would solve some of the problems we talk about. Things you'd be able to pay for Social Security, Medicare, defense, environmental concerns, maybe even pay off the debt, which seems unpayable right now.
Right.
But it's not going to happen if we continue down this road of more and more regulations. And I think it's pretty clear that the presumptive nominee on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton, wants to have more regulations on all sorts of different industries. So that has certainly not worked. It's doubtful how much Donald Trump would want to remove the regulation, but certainly he wouldn't want to make a bad problem worse. And so I think we're going to have some choices about whether we want to have growth in the future or whether we want to simply get used to the fact that we will have 0.5% of growth in the economy.
Slower growth forever. That's not a good sign.
That's not.
Yeah, I'm reminded there was an article in the Wall Street Journal some years ago called Ruby Red Tape, and it was about they were drilling, if I remember, out a gas or oil pipeline. They were putting the pipeline from like Wyoming to the Gulf Coast, or not Gulf Coast, but the West Coast, Oregon, somewhere like that. And at some point they had to hire something like 148 paleontologists. And you go, paleontologist? Why would you need a paleontologist to put a gas pipeline in? And the answer was, well, there could be some rock formations that some Native Americans put together folks, we're not talking about the pyramids of Egypt here. Have you ever been to Wyoming? It's remote, nothing, out flat, and a lot of mountains and a lot of rocks. 148 paleontologists to legally put this pipeline in from Wyoming. This is insanity. So the overregulation that we have in this country, which of course Bernie Sanders, thankfully, he doesn't look like we're going to have him. But I mean, good golly, the socialists, that's all they believe. Continuously more regulation, more stoppage of work. So you have to have regulation to some degree. I'm not a libertarian who says throw everything to the wind. Milton Friedman said it best. He said the government should be the umpire. Yeah. It should be the referee in the game. It shouldn't get too involved. So if you get to the point where a foul is called at every single time the guy brings the ball down the court in basketball, it's not a fun game anymore. And what they do is they tend to pluck the goose that laid the golden egg, or they strangle the goose that laid the golden egg. And that's what's happening. We're getting strangled by more and more regulation all over the country. So one of the things we're going to have to do at some point is something's going to force us, and I think it's going to be more challenges coming, to go, hey, guys, we talked about it in a book, From Boom to Bust and Beyond. There's a couple of chapters in there precisely about what we're seeing right now.
Let's talk about
that people are moving to the states that are business friendly, like Texas, the less regulation states. One of the benefits we have in our state, and this, I remember you said your dad kind of joked about it, is we have a state legislature every other year, and I think it only lasts like 5 months. And that sounds like a joke to somebody who's a progressive. But guess what? Probably 80% of the congressmen are businessmen because they can. So the issue is, if you get more regulators, they're going to find ways to do their job, regulate more, which is going to strangle business. More freedom is taken away. And if you take away freedoms and continue to take away freedoms, then you're slowly killing the American dream. It's kind of like, it's not an axe murder or, chainsaw massacre kind of deal. It's just put a needle in the arm and just bleed it out slowly. So part of our issue is we're deleveraging. Part of it is the demographics are weak right now, but we can have explosive growth in the future, next decade in particular, but we got to get some of this settled, and that's the best way to get it settled is for more people like us and like the listeners to this radio show get armed, get informed, and then know how to intelligently vote and also to express your opinion to other people. Because the challenging times that we're heading into, which again I think are going to be very challenging before the next, say, 15 years are over, especially with the entitlements and so forth, that creates opportunity. Because status quo will tend to rule until things shake up, and that's when the opportunity rises, and that's when we've got to be ready with the answers.
Jerry Tuma with us, and again, his book is entitled From Boom to Bust and Beyond. We also have posted his Cornerstone Report, the 2016 year in preview, so that's available to you free of charge, of course. His book is available if you would like to order it, and of course, he has written the previous book called Smart Money, which I think you would appreciate as well. But let's, if we can, take a break, and if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. But also love to hear from some of you that maybe haven't had a chance to join with us in our Truth Team 360 event last week. You certainly can do that by going to the website, and we had a few people yesterday said, I missed out, and I'd certainly like to support this ministry. So often you're hearing things on this program you hear nowhere else, so I appreciate the fact that you understand that and would certainly appreciate your financial support. It's at the website, pointofview.net, and you can give us a call, 1-800-351-1212.
Does Point of View make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as district health director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with Point of View? Jeremy Dice of First Liberty is representing Dr. Walsh in his effort to correct this apparent injustice. And Jeremy Dice became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking the truth in love. Click on Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit. Please do it today. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Jerry Tuma in studio, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Maybe you have questions about investments or your financial circumstances. Obviously, again, we're going to be giving general information only, but you can certainly feel free to contact Jerry Tuma. We have a link on our website to his latest report, Cornerstone Report, and I'll have you give that 800 number in just a minute. I'll let people get a pen to write that down if they want to talk to you directly. But our number online, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Nevada first, KNLB. Nick, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, how are you today?
Very good. What is your question?
Yes, basically, I would like to ask your guest's opinion of David Wilkerson's prophecy in the 70s about the total collapse of the American economy, a dollar crash, 6 months worth of banks being closed as a judgment against America's turning away from God. And even if maybe he doesn't view that very well, that modern-day Michael Snyder, a Christian who's basically saying the same thing also, and others.
Sure, okay.
On that same subject, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point because, as we've said before, you look at the Old Testament and see God's judgment against other nations. Now, there's a difference between Israel and the United States, but there's not a difference between other nations that God judged and our nation. So I don't put us in a special category like Israel, but you do see the rise and fall of nations. And let's look at what we've done to ourselves even before God's judgment. $20 trillion in debt. And the entitlements that will just eventually take up all of our circumstances, as well as some of these problems with currency and trade. So what are your thoughts about this?
Well, right now, and again, I think you kind of know this, but it bears repeating, I think the bigger risk to the U.S. right now and the world is deflationary. So we had this giant debt bubble. And it's kind of had three stages. Stage one was America and the subprimes and real estate. Stage two is Europe, which is nowhere near worked out. Most of our real estate banking issues have been worked through. There's a little bit left over, but not a lot. Europe is still really messed up. They have huge problems. Japan is messed up, but you're really kind of in phase three of this, which involves China. China has a huge debt bubble, problems in their what we call their shadow banking system, which is the non-bank, financial entities out there. So I think there's going to be another round of deflationary pressure over the next 2 or 3 years. It could be quite intense. In the long run, in relation to your listener's question, that's more of a hyperinflationary scenario, in my opinion, and that is possible. Why? How? Well, right now you're hearing this in the press and the financial press amongst the central bankers, helicopter money.
Yes.
Now, helicopter money is different. In the past, to rescue us from the crisis, Ben Bernanke did what's called quantitative easing, which means he printed money, basically electronically, because he was in charge of the Fed. They bought a bunch of bonds, so they pumped the money into the system. That helped reinflate the stock market and the real estate market. But it really hasn't trickled down to Main Street. In other words, the GDP growth, as we talked about earlier, a stunning 0.5 for the first quarter. We've had periods, like under Reagan and so forth, you'd had 6 to 8% annual growth of the GDP for periods. And if you weren't at 4, you were really, really shagging it. You weren't doing well in that environment. Now we're, at best, we pop up to 3 and go back down to negative in this cycle since 2009. So the issue here is, if they do practice helicopter money, Deutsche Bank had a really big article on it just recently. What does that mean? That means you're in desperate times right then. That means they've run out of ammo everywhere else, and you literally print money. This is popularized by Milton Friedman. He just said, throw the money out of helicopters. Give it to the people. Just print it and give it out. And that truly is what inflation would be. And I could see the potential for that. It's actually becoming something that sounds radically nutcase, but is fairly respected, and you've practiced it. The United States practiced it during our major wars. Great Britain practiced it during the South Sea Bubble in the 1700s and their major wars, Napoleonic Wars and Crimea War. So it's not something that hasn't been done before, and appears, according to Deutsche Bank, to be legally legal, if you want to say it that. There is a precedent to be able to do it under the constitutions of all the central banks of the world. So it won't happen now. As Deutsche Bank said, it might happen in the next recession. But what we have today is we've got this huge entitlement bubble that you're talking about, which, if you can imagine, if you've ever been to the Rocky Mountains and you get to the foothills and then you go up to the Pikes Peak or whatever, we're at the foothills of the entitlement ramp up in America. So we're just now seeing the people that are the baby boom generation, which you and I both are starting to move into Medicare and Social Security. But that's about a 15-year deal. 10,000 a day, but we're barely just starting into that. So the 20 trillion we have in debt today, will it be 40 trillion in 10 years? I don't know. It's going to be a big number. Don't count on the Congressional Budget Office because their numbers are fantasy. They're silly. they're projecting that all federal spending will go down over the next 15 years, except for Social Security and Medicare. Yeah,
it's not going to go under a President Hillary Clinton.
No. I do think that there are, like I said, are more challenging times coming. Now, again, that creates opportunity. If you're talking about investing, that creates better opportunity generally than normal times, which is what we tend to specialize at Cornerstone Financial Services, our firm. But it also creates opportunity. You cannot go into the status quo. We can't come out of 2030, if you will, with our status quo systems.
Yes.
A lot of them are going to have major reformation. And by definition, that means, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if you're having trouble with your car, you're going to take it in and get it fixed. Some of these issues are going to have to be fixed for America to go on.
That's for sure. And again, when we talk about this idea of inflation and the banks closing, which is kind of what David Wilkerson has predicted, and of course Nick mentioned, and others have, in just a couple of weeks, I'm taking a number of Point of View listeners to Israel, and then we're going to Greece. Well, think about...
boy.
Banks closing down. And so, you and I have talked before about what inflation really looks like. Years ago, I had a chance to interview a person who was a missionary in Zimbabwe. And I've even given you $100 trillion Zimbabwe note,
right.
And those
where
were,
that came
at one
from.
time, the Zimbabwe dollar was pretty much equal to the American dollar. Now I have, and I can give you another one if you want, $100 trillion Zimbabwe note, and it means nothing. And so then you could see the possibility of banks closing for a period of time, of individuals dealing with inflation where the money that's in your pocket is worth more at the morning than it is in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And where people are buying in the morning to get the best dollar value because their dollars literally are losing value every hour that they're awake.
That's the extreme version of helicopter money. That's right. That happened in Germany in 1923. And the other countries you mentioned, many of the Latin American countries. So it's a tool that should be a last resort tool. But what's happening again is everything's kind of the central banks of the world, the Fed heads and so forth all around the world. Mario Draghi even said that's an interesting concept recently. Now, Janet Yellen hasn't embraced it yet, but Bernanke kind of said Japan should have been doing it a long time ago. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And if you combine a war situation with that, you just blow the top off the whole thing.
Well, let's, if we can, just for a minute. Last week we had a chance to talk with Michael Ferris, and he was talking about some of the problems in the political realm, and that's exactly what you were talking about right here.
Point of View was the first and most important program that announced to the world the need for H.R. 6, which was the key battle that we fought years ago with Marlon Baddox to stop the eradication of homeschooling by Congress. A bill called H.R. 6. That was the high point, perhaps, but faithfully over the years, this radio program has stood for faithfulness and stood for truth and stood for homeschooling rights. And I would just encourage every homeschooler out there to call and pledge something. Whatever amount it is, call and pledge something and be a part of the station and program that has been so.
So again, we're going to really encourage people to take some action steps over the next couple of weeks because of things that we are watching in Congress. And again, my goal, I think, Jerry, is sometimes just to have Congress do no harm. It's called the Hippocratic Oath, right?
Oh, yeah.
And if we could just have politicians do no harm, then we can let small businesses and entrepreneurs have the freedom to go out there and create wealth and do that.
Yeah, I use the analogy in our book, Boom to Bust and Beyond. Mr. Politician, please don't do more regulation, more taxation. Of course, this is before the current regime even started, and I said, it's like, assume that our businessmen are runners and you put them in the race, you're not going to load them up with a 50-pound bag of rocks on their back. Well, that's what excessive taxation regulation mean. And that's the problems we've got. And that's a lot of why our economy is so slow right now.
Let's take a break. And this will be a great time for some of you, if you are interested in maybe helping to support this ministry as we are talking about today economics in the first hour. Second hour, we're going to have Avi Melamed with us, and he has written the book Inside the Middle East. He's an expert that I'm so grateful we've been able to get today so we can understand what's going on in the Middle East, which is another factor here as well in terms of how that's affecting our economy, not to mention a war against ISIS. So we're going to be talking about all sorts of issues. And as you listen to Point of View view and you say, well, I've never heard that before, maybe that's a good reason to become one of those Truth Team 360 members. You can go to our website, pointofview.net, to do that, and we'll take some more phone calls, too, if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Alan West.
You know, when I think about the importance of Point of View Radio, it is so essential that we connect with the Christian conservative community on the issues and the topics of the day so that they can really get that information to educate and inform them to make better decisions. You know, I have two daughters, 22 and 18, and one of the things that concerns me is the impact that the culture will have upon them. And if we don't stand up as evangelical Christians, as Christian conservatives, and start to show the other points of view and start to talk about these issues that are critical out there for the building of character, the strengthening of the soul and the spirit against some of the very negative impacts of culture, then we will lose our young people. We will lose future generations. The important thing about Point of View ministry is that it arms you. It equips you to go out and do exactly as God commanded Joshua to do. To be strong and of good courage, for the Lord thy God shall never leave you nor forsake you.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
Colonel Alan West, and again, just very appropriate because second hour today we're going to be talking with Avi Melamed, and his book is entitled Inside the Middle East. A real expert on the Middle East. We'll be talking about View. And then tomorrow, Dr. Sebastian Gorkin will be with us, and he's got this new book out. I've heard him on all sorts of talk shows, so I've finally been able to get him on ours, Defeating Jihad. So again, a very significant set of challenges. But in studio with us for a few more minutes, Jerry Tuma, which again is with the Cornerstone Financial Services. We have the Cornerstone Report. And Jerry might mention that if people want to contact you, we have the link there, but also they can call you because any kind of questions that people have are going to be of a general nature. But when you know their specifics, you can give them more specific information.
Yeah, because we can't give generalized information or advice. 800-327-4285. That's 1-800-327-4285. And of course, we're primarily working with investors and investment people because that's what we do. And our view is you don't have to ride the ups and downs of the roller coaster of the market unless you just want to. You know, there are ways to, in our opinion, make money in any market environment. That's really kind of what we do at Cornerstone.
You know, again, we've been talking about people joining with us at Truth Team 360, and that's a great stewardship issue, and I hope people will consider what they might do. But in light of even some of the conversation I know I'm going to have in the second hour and even hearing Alan West, we have to recognize that shocks in the Middle East affect us as well. And look at the price of oil. Right now, everybody loves the fact that the price has gone down. But there is a day coming when turmoil in the Middle East might affect us in very negative ways.
Very much so. And a lot of commentators have said, well, this is like the 80s. This is nothing like the 80s. In the 80s, we drilled so much oil, there was a 22% oversupply of oil. And you probably remember the day, you know, oil went to like $31 a barrel on the second Arab oil embargo with OPEC when they had more power. Dropped all the way down to 10 because Saudi Arabia said, we're going to stop giving away our market share, and they just pumped the world full of oil. 22% oversupply is big. Right now, we're at 1.6% oversupply. The crash in oil prices, I think, largely was driven by leverage. A lot of people were way over leveraged, kind of like the subprime leverage, kind of like the stock market. They get too crazy with that, and the big banks reportedly had way too much leverage in the oil market. Now, you do have an oversupply. You have record, quote, inventories, but that's a short-term situation, not a long-term deal. If you look at world oil demand, it increases by about 1.2 million barrels per year. That means by the second half of this year, we're going to be close to back in balance. That means oil probably stabilizes around 50, between 50 and 60. But the razor's edge issue of this is all about the tipping point, because if you look a little longer term, instead of looking only at as far as the nose on your face, you know, the best car drivers in NASCAR, they look the furthest down the road you can see. And so what you got to do is look a little further down the road. Here's a simple question. Ask yourself, in 10 years, do you think that there will be more people driving cars in China than there are now? And India, they don't have very many roads over there, but they want everything. They have the youngest population group in the world. You know, almost half their people are under 25 years old, and they're socially connected. They're learning. They're building infrastructure. More Indians are going to be driving cars. So, I mean, that's all you got to do. Real simple. Supply and demand. And that tells you that there's a huge demand wave coming in the emerging markets, as we call them. Slight oversupply currently, which is mostly a short-term phenomenon. So I think that oil prices long-term are going to go way, way higher. And I think it's a great opportunity. The old streets, it's a good time now.
Well, since you're talking about oil, let's get into that. Chris, listening on KYCC in California. Chris, thank you for calling today.
Hi, Kirby. How you doing?
Very good. What's on your mind?
Sorry for the raspy voice. Allergies are bad. My question was, I heard that Russia and North Korea are no longer going to be buying and selling oil based off of the dollar. That's really going to affect our economy.
Certainly is. You know, and that's something we should mention, because right now the universal currency has been the dollar.
Right.
Now more and more countries are saying we're not going to use the dollar anymore. We'll use the euro, or we might use various kind of Federal Reserve buying, all sorts of things. Talk about that if you might.
Yeah, and I think I think it's a trend that you have to watch. So in other words, it is a growing trend, more and more movement away from the dollar as the international method of exchange. But you also have the extremists out there that act like the dollar's going to collapse tomorrow. And I know it's going to be tomorrow. Oh, well, it wasn't yesterday, but yeah, but it's going to be the next tomorrow kind of thing. And the reality is there's just not enough of the other world currencies out there to conduct all the trade. So the dollar's not going to have an overnight collapse. If the dollar does have a collapse, I think it's probably in the next decade. It's been strengthening the last few years. It's kind of going back down a little bit right now, but the dollar looks like it will strengthen in the next crisis to me, because America, in spite of all our problems, is still the strongest economy in the world. And so the issue is, where else do you want to go? In Europe, they have negative interest rates. In Japan, they have negative interest rates, meaning you get back less than you put in if you buy even a 10-year bond in Japan. You get back less money than you put into it. Now, that's a great deal. No one's going to do that. So the issue is, those problems, I think, are much more for the next decade than this decade. I do think eventually you could have a flight from the dollar, but it's not now. And so what you got to be careful about is taking things that could eventually happen that might be 5 or 10 years down the road or farther even, and then the fearmongers that are out there doing all that. So, yeah, Russia would like to disembark from the dollar to some extent, but the bottom line is you still are close to 80% of world trade. 70 to 80% of world trade is in the dollar. So it's not going to happen overnight.
Let me just mention that the Cornerstone report that you're making available here really helps you look at stocks, at quite a bit about China. I have a whole section here all about China.
Because that's the big deal right now.
And then patterns of history. Can we learn from history? The only thing we learn from history.
Those are amazing patterns.
And so I just think this is a valuable document. And since you're so generous, we are put it on our website and making it available. But again, as people want to get more information, they're saying, well, this is good, but okay, what does that mean to me? They can contact you, right, for an individual analysis and things of that nature.
And if you don't mind, I can just give the 800 number again. It's 800-327-4285, 1-800-327-4285.
Well, Jerry Tuma, we've been with you since 1987. Didn't know what that date was. I started working as a guest host for Marlin in 1986, and before that I was on the show back in the 1980s. So we've been around for a while, and again, it's just been exciting to see how this ministry has continued to grow, and we certainly welcome the new stations that have joined us. And so thanks for joining us. We'll do it again.
You're welcome, Kirby. Thanks a lot.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with Avi Melamed and give you a chance to really first hear and then ask questions about what's happening in the Middle East. So I think you're going to benefit from that tremendously. But don't forget, as we have been suggesting even last week, you might want to support this ministry, and even a one-time gift would be appreciated. But certainly some of you might be able to give $1 a day. That's $30 a month, or $360 for the year. That's why we call it Truth Team 360 for your gift. We certainly want to not only send you the Outlook magazine, but the MP3 Bible stick, which comes from the ministry Faith Comes by Hearing, the entire New Testament. And you can do that by going to the website of Point of View, pointofview.net, or, of course, the pledge line number, 1-800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151. We'll take a break and talk about the Middle East right after this.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can, or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other, and I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today, pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Often we talk about the Middle East, but I really wanted this hour to give you a really good, comprehensive, and complete analysis of what is happening there because of this new book out, Inside the Middle East. It's one I've been hearing about. I took the time to go all the way through the book, and we'll do our best to try to cover some of this. There's so much to cover, everything from, why do we have these conflicts in the Middle East, as well as what about the Muslim Brotherhood? How about this war in Syria? Of course, what does this mean to the nation of Israel, and much more. So we'll do our best to try in this next hour to cover some of this. We have with us the author of the book, Avi Melamed, and he is the author of Inside the Middle East. He is an internationally acclaimed Middle East expert, former senior official on Arab affairs and intelligence official. He now also is with the Independent Middle East Strategic Intelligence Analyst, also a fellow of intelligence and Middle East affairs at the Eisenhower Institute at Gettysburg College. This is a book that I certainly would commend to you, and we've posted some information about him and the book on our website, pointofview.net. Avi, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hello, Kirby. Thank you for having me.
One of the things I think we need to start with is your sense throughout this book that America is not well served because they don't really have good, accurate information and even analysis of what's happening in the Middle East. I know that's one of the things you're trying to provide, but where is the gap? Why is it that we do not understand what is happening in the Middle East in terms of our foreign policy actions?
Well, to my evaluation, the gap stems from two major challenges. One is the fact that the majority of the Western's mediators of knowledge in the United States, like academia people or media people or non-governmental organizations, including also governmental agencies, simply don't speak Arabic. And this is very substantial because the meaning of that is that at the end of the day, their ability to provide a cohesive, comprehensive picture of the Middle East is very limited at best. The second challenge stems from the fact that, unfortunately, the discussion about the Middle East in our circles of knowledge in the United States, like faculties, like governmental agencies, is very much suffocated with a Western mindset. So you may find a very interesting theories and concepts that the only problem with them is that they have nothing to do with the reality of the Middle East. I would even say that sometimes the conversation about the Middle East is very shallow, it's very one-dimensional, and I would even say sometimes even juvenile.
Let's, if we can, maybe talk a little bit about your background, because indeed, having lived in some of these countries, understanding and being able to decipher what is being said in Arabic gives you a somewhat unique set of circumstances and a vantage point that allows you to understand some of the mistakes that have been made. True?
Yes, that is very correct.
So if we can, let's maybe get into a couple of these. One that we were talking about last hour is Saudi Arabia. I remember in your book, one of the statistics that really jumped out to me is that on the Forbes list of world's billionaires, 10 were Saudi nationals with a combined fortune of $51 billion. So when we talk about the Saudis, we're talking about a wealthy country, but also a country that would lose, at least the leadership would lose a great deal in terms of the expansion of power that comes from Iran. So on the one hand, we call Saudi Arabia our ally, but in many cases we have real reservations about Saudi Arabia. What's an accurate perspective of how we should look at Saudi Arabia today?
Well, you should look at Saudi Arabia the exact way you should look at the whole Middle East, and this is in a non-shallow and non-one-dimensional aspect, because the Middle East is a very many different layers. So you could find sometimes an ally that doesn't have totally only just bright points. You could also find easily very dark spots. I guess what I'm saying actually is that I think that one of the things that the United States needs to depart is this kind of like Hollywood approach, sort of speaking, trying to label people as bad or good. That is not the case. We are dealing with nations in the Middle East that have different interests and different, sometimes conflicting interests, and I think this is the right way to look at them.
What about Iran? Because we have, of course, now a treaty that we have actually tried to put into place, our president has, and yet we, as this part of the world, and certainly people in Israel, are very concerned about a nuclear Iran. How are we to think about some of the tensions that are taking place in that country and some of the expansionary ideas that they actually want to implement in the Middle East?
Well, Kevin, the problem is not Iran. The problem is the government that rules Iran, the mullah regime. This is a very dangerous and extreme regime that, unfortunately, in the last generation has been quite successfully expanding its influence in the region through a very aggressive policy. In fact, in the last generation, this regime has been gladly and cynically sacrificing Israelis, Palestinians, Syrians, Lebanese, Iraqis, and others on the altars of its cynical interest. You know, I would be even more concerned not only in the context of the nuclear Iranian project, but also in the kind of like the regular, conventional sort of speaking. As a matter of fact, is one of the major concerns is that following the agreement with Iran, Iran's ability to further fuel its proxies in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Gaza Strip, and other places will increase. The meaning of that is an increasing instability in the Middle East.
So again, some very important actors that we'll talk about. But if I can, maybe let's go to chapter 3 of your book, because you talk about political Islam. And we recognize, even as we have listeners that are Christian and Jewish, Muslim, all sorts of things, that you are using this term in a specific way. But this is the idea of developing a caliphate. And so if we can, for just a minute, talk about what you mean by this concept of political Islam and how we should understand that here in the West.
Well, when we talk about political Islam, let's take, for example, one of the most well-known representative, and that is, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood, the biggest mass movement in the Muslim Sunni world. We have to remember that in the outlook of the Muslims, generally in Islam, Islam is the right way for people to live their life, and Islam believes that people should live their life according to the Islamic religious law that is known by the name of Sharia. The reason for that is that according to the Islamic outlook, Sharia is a master plan that was given to mankind by people to live their life. Therefore, any other ideology or political ideology like communism or democracy or liberalism or socialism is totally rejected by political Islam. Hence, the importance of the concept of a caliphate, which is a kind of like a superstructure of an entity that is being guided according to the Islamic religious law, the Sharia.
Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about that. We have one of our mandatory breaks, but we're going to talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, the establishment of a caliphate, and then a little bit later we'll talk about ISIS. They have a different view, but nevertheless still, again, this idea of a caliphate, of Sharia law, of jihad, and so many other topics we're going to get in today. And it's all part of this new book, Inside the Middle East, Making Sense of the Most Dangerous and Complicated Region in the World. And we have Avi Melamed, and he is with us as the author of the book. And if you have comments or questions about this idea of especially political Islam, about jihad, Sharia, the caliphate, and much more, we'll certainly welcome your phone calls. We need to take a break. We'll continue our conversation about this new book, Inside the Middle East, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Two news stories about Obamacare came to very different conclusions. United Health, the largest health insurer in America, announced that it was pulling out of Obamacare due to mounting financial losses. At the same time, the Department of Health and Human Services released a report boasting about how Obamacare is holding down costs for consumers. The decision by United Health is not surprising. While it is the largest health insurer in the United States, it is not one of the largest players in the Obamacare market. Much of its business comes from offering plans to employers. Nevertheless, it currently covers about 750,000 Obamacare customers. Back when Affordable Care Act was being debated, critics warned that we were attempting to fix a broken health care system by piling more regulations and requirements on top of it. The bill added pages of regulations, subsidies, exchanges, and coverage mandates. Critics warned that people would eventually be paying more for less coverage, and that is what has happened. You wouldn't know that if you read the latest government report that claimed that Obamacare has made health care more affordable. It claims that there is only an 8% increase in the average premium after shopping. Dr. Merrill Matthews says those last two words are significant. Millions of people in the exchange were hit with unaffordable premium increases and had to find something they could afford. So they shifted from a more expensive silver plan to a less expensive bronze plan, or chose a plan with a much higher deductible, or settled for a plan with a much more narrow network of physicians. Some may have done all three. Today we have higher health care costs, less coverage, higher deductibles, and more narrow networks of doctors. Taxpayers and insurance customers should demand a better system than Obamacare. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360, Dr. Sean McDowell.
We clearly live in difficult times, especially for Christians. Sometimes it feels like the culture is just turning against us quickly. We need to speak up with compassion, but we need to speak up with truth in the way that Jesus did. That's one reason why I'm a big fan of Point of View, is they're dealing with cutting-edge, controversial subjects that the church sometimes doesn't want to deal with. But they do their homework, they do it informed, they also do it in a way that's practical so we understand the issues but know what we can do about them. Ministries like Point of View can only survive with the help of listeners. One of the reasons I think Point of View is so valuable is because they just deal with the cutting issues of the day in a manner that's informed, in a manner that's gracious, and in a manner that's making a difference. Point of View is standing up for truth, and they need your help.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
Dr. Sean McDowell reminding us again of how important it is to support Point of View. Last week, of course, we had our Truth Team 360 week, and still giving you an opportunity if you'd like to join with us. We certainly do need your financial support. We're a listener-supported program, and we are trying to address many of these cutting-edge issues right now, talking about, of course, the issue of the Middle East, and we'll be talking about jihad tomorrow and many other topics, even talked about some of the economic issues in the first hour. So, again, for your gift of $360 a year, that's $1 a day, $30 a month, and you can give it all at once, or you can give it $1 a day or every month, however you want to do that. But again, we encourage you to become a member of the Truth Team 360. As you do so, of course, you receive all sorts of benefits. Of course, our Outlook magazine, which addresses many of these issues, but we're also making available the MP3 Bible Stick from our ministry, Faith Comes by Hearing, a word-for-word version of the New Testament from Matthew to the book of Revelation, and it includes music, sound effects, dozens of voices, and I think you would really appreciate that as well and pass it on to others. So Number 800-347-5155. The website pointofview.net. A couple of you yesterday actually joined with us at the Truth Team level. We'd love to hear from you, and we will encourage you to do so. And as a matter of fact, some of you joined at a higher level, I might say, a larger level. That was had one that joined at $100 a month. So again, you can find out some of the benefits that come from that, and also see how you can be supporting this ministry that we are having as we address these very important issues. Topic today is the most dangerous and complicated region on earth. Avi Melamed is our guest. He is the author of the book, fluent in Arabic, Hebrew, and English, has spent decades operating in Arab cities throughout the region, really helping us understand the inside story. And Avi, for just a few minutes, let's come back to this idea of the caliphate, because as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's really why the Muslim Brotherhood began, the desire to once again reestablish a caliphate that had sort of broken apart after World War I. So we're talking about sort of like a supranational Islamic government, aren't we, that implements Sharia law?
That's correct. The whole idea is actually to establish, as I said, a superstructure that is ultra national, ultra religious law known by the name of Sharia.
What's the future then of the Muslim at one point, Mohammed Morsi, but that was a very short presidency you talk about. We have people that have been involved in the Muslim Brotherhood in this country. What do you say is the future, and how is that going to be being played out both in Egypt and other countries around the world?
Well, Kevin, as of now, the Muslim Brotherhood as political Islam is basically experiencing a deep, both ideological and political crisis that stems from different reasons. However, it's important to emphasize that this is a very significant factor. It's a very significant political player. The Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam is deeply rooted within Arab and Muslim societies, politically, culturally, socially, economically, and so on. As of now, I would say that Muslim Brotherhood is experiencing this crisis, and it's in a phase of recalculating its way. So I would guess that we will see a new form, in a way, of the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam that emerged. And one of the predictions that I share with my readers in my book is that I predict that the Muslim Brotherhood will be mostly tending to become more practical, practical speaking, and the more tough-liners part of the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam theoretically could find an alternative niche, and this is militant Islamist groups.
Let's talk about militant Islam, because again, with Muslim Brotherhood, they were seen more as involved in maybe like a cultural jihad, or one that tries to deal with the culture and within the political institutions. But we talk about militant Islam. Is both dead and alive. Obviously, he no longer lives, but we have in its place everything from ISIS and the Islamic State to a variety of other radical Muslim groups. Where are we moving in that regard? Because it seems like we have a militant Islam that is both Sunni as well as Shiite. First of all, talk about the Sunni Muslim militants. That would be certainly the Islamic State, wouldn't it?
Yes, Kevin, definitely. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Islamic Jihad and other groups that I guess people in the West are aware of or familiar with are part of the Sunni militant Islamist groups. The bottom line in that context is, as long as the situation is chaotic, and it is chaotic, unfortunately, militant Islamist groups will thrive. We have to understand that they draw the power from the chaos in the different parts of the Muslim and the Arab societies, and therefore they could linger on and thrive.
So again, we are supposedly trying to fight ISIS right now. If you were to advise the next presidential candidates, what should we do? I mean, is there a particular way in which we as American military or even in covert operations can bring down the Islamic State? What would you advise in terms of this battle that we are fighting right now with certainly the Islamic State?
Well, Kevin, my first advice would be understand exactly what is the phenomenon. I'm saying that because, believe it or not, there are people in the West that fail to understand the true nature of this phenomenon. For example, there are people in the West that try to attribute the emergence of ISIS to Western colonialism or imperialism, which is, of course, not is the case. Worse than that, there are influential people in the West that argue that militant Islam and ISIS, in a way, is associated with the issue of global warming, which is, of course, it's totally ridiculous.
Yes.
So there is a real need to understand the roots, the ideological, the cultural, the political, the social, the economic roots that gives birth to militant Islam. And the common denominator is very simple, yet it's very important. It's all first is to really understand the roots of this phenomenon. Radical groups operate. ISIS does not operate in a bubble. ISIS is related to the inner Iraqi political power struggle. ISIS is related to the war in Syria. ISIS is related to the growing Iranian-Arab power struggle and many other things. So in order to be able to successfully defeat this phenomenon, it's not only about the military effort. It calls upon a cohesive effort, politically, culturally, socially, and not less important, really understanding the phenomenon.
What about the threat that ISIS might pose? I mean, there are some, Avi, that might be saying, we don't have a dog in that fight. As sad as it is that the Islamic State is taking over Iraq and Syria, it doesn't pose any threat to the United States or to our allies. Is that a fair statement?
Well, ISIS is a very severe threat. We have to internalize that ISIS loathe every single value that you and I stand for. ISIS loathe and despise and reject every single Western values that we believe in. But there is something which is much more important than that. ISIS truly view you and me as morally inferior. ISIS believe that we are standing for a corrupted way of life, and we are, according to this distorted outlook, we are contaminating purity of life. Therefore, we have to understand that as far as ISIS is concerned, neither of militant Islamist groups, they have no moral restrictions whatsoever. The combination of this extreme lunatic, distorted ideology together with possible mass destruction weapon like chemical weapon or biological weapon, or even some people talk about what we call dirty bomb, this combination is enormously disturbing.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, continue our conversation with Avi Melamed. And if you'd like, is entitled Inside the Middle East. We have information about it on our website, pointofview.net. You'll probably be able to find it in your local bookstore. It's published by Skyhorse Publishing, and it goes on for almost 400 pages. We've looked a little bit at some of the radical Islam coming from the Sunni side. We'll look at it from the Shiite side in just a minute, and also, of course, talk about Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and much, much more. But if you'd like to join us today, maybe you have some thoughts about the war on terrorism, our conflict in the Middle East, you're welcome to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. And as we go to a break, it would be a good time to find out more about how to join with us at Truth Team 360. We'll be right back.
Does point of view make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as district health director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with point of view? Jeremy Dice of First Liberty is representing Dr. Walsh in his effort to correct this apparent injustice. And Jeremy Dice became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View Radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking the truth in love. Click on Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit. Please do it today. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Certainly love to get some of your thoughts about whether we should fight this war on terror and how we should be aligned with the various countries that we've been talking about. And if you'd like to join us and express an opinion or ask a question, you are welcome to do so. 1-800-351-1212. The book is entitled Inside the Middle East. You'll probably be able to find it in your local bookstore. Making Sense of the Most Dangerous and Complicated Region on Earth. And we are privileged to have with us just a little bit longer Avi Melamed, and we'll get into some of the other aspects of the book, but really understand it in a deeper way. We certainly do commend it to you. If you go to the website, pointofview.net, you can click on his picture there, and that will take you to his website, avimelamed.com. Has information about his book there, which you can order. We also have a link that you can get it both on Kindle and hardcover. So lots of great ways for you to learn a little bit more about what we're talking about today. A topic we'll address again tomorrow with a different author as we get into trying to understand the Middle East. If you would like to join the conversation, like I said, we'd love to take those calls, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to join with us on the Truth Team 360, of course, you can visit our website, pointofview.net. Let me jump to Chapter 6 before we get into some of the other actors, because we haven't said much about Syria. You have a chapter there on the war on Syria. We're in the midst of, obviously, a civil war, but also I'd love to get your thoughts, Avi, on the refugee crisis that has affected Europe, and also our president saying we would take Syrian refugees. Can you give us some perspective there? Is this dangerous, and why should we be concerned about what is happening in Syria right now?
Well, Coleman, definitely. First, allow me to rephrase in a way the definition. I know that many people in the West call the war in Syria a civil war. The war in Syria is not a civil war. In fact, since 2011, November 2011, the war in Syria became an Iranian-Arab struggle.
Yes, that's how you call it. Yeah, okay. Yes,
white collision. And so I think it's very important to emphasize that. As for the question of the refugees, obviously, this is one of the most tragic outcomes of this event. This is one of the most dramatic events in the history of the Middle East. We are talking right now, as of today, about 7 million people in Syria, maybe more, have become dislocated inside Syria. We are talking about some 4-5 million Syrians that became refugees fleeing out from Syria. And as you mentioned, some of them are trying to make their way to the United States. Other than, of course, the huge challenge and the huge tragedy of these people that are, most of them, of course, are fleeing, trying to save their life and their kids from the inferno in Syria. Unfortunately, we also know that some of the people that are coming with those groups are not necessarily have a good, positive intentions. These are the people that may be associated with
the fact that we really have two kinds of Muslims, 1.6 Muslims in the world. About 90% are Sunni Muslims, and so that would be Egypt and Turkey, and certainly some of those groups we just talked about a little bit, about 10% Shiite. But that, as you point out, is a real struggle between Iran and the Arab world. So how does that Iranian-Arab power struggle, it surfaces obviously in Syria, but help us understand exactly what the significance of that might be.
Well, Gordon, we are talking about huge struggle, and actually when you look today at the Middle East, you could see right now 8 different arenas of this Iranian-Arab power struggle. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, 3 islands occupied by the Iranians in the Gulf, Bahrain, Yemen, the Gaza Strip, and finally the Iranian nuclear project. All of these arenas, separately and altogether, result in an ongoing, escalating, and deepening turbulence in the Middle East and a lot of instability.
So, again, when we talk about that instability, we really just need to go back to Iran for just a minute, because if we can, explain the ambitions there, because when we think of the war on terror, most of the time we're thinking of Sunni Muslims, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Muslim Brotherhood. But what are the Iranian intentions in the Middle East right now?
In order to understand it, we have to understand the core value of the Shiite Muslim belief, which is motivated by a deep sense of being deprived of the right to lead the Muslim world. It goes back to events that happened, which actually marks the emergence of the Shiites. The current rule in Iran, the Iranian Shiite Mullah regime, is strongly motivated by the strong Shiite ideology and narratives, which, by the way, emphasize a lot of suffering and misery and agony. There is a very strong apocalyptic component within the Shiite belief, which is much stronger, by the way, than the Sunnis one. However, the Mullah regime in Iran is motivated by these very strong narratives, and the Mullah regime in Iran is motivated by the desire to reclaim, sort of speaking, in their mind, the crown that, according to the Shia belief, was taken away from them more than 1,300 years ago. Wow. To that end, the Mullah regime is motivated by a concept known as exporting the Islamic revolution in different parts of the Middle East. And unfortunately, when you look retrospectively in the last generation, the Mullah regime was quite successful in that task. The outcome of that was, unfortunately, an increasing instability in different parts of the Middle East, where many are just paying dearly this price.
You mentioned just in, and I Iran certainly hold to this, but we have talked on this program before about this idea of the Mahdi, of the 12th Imam, and about the idea of a conflagration, a major conflict that would usher that in. And it's held by those called, for example, the Twelvers. But can you speak to that issue? Because that's an important aspect of our even trying to understand foreign policy. Because if you are in a position of leadership and you are convinced that actually bringing about some kind of conflict might usher in this kind of new Muslim age, especially a Shiite Muslim kind of caliphate, then some of the issues of deterrence that we have used in
well, you know, the major line in Shia, there are different branches, but the major branch is the one that is known by the name of the 12ish. Basically, this branch believes that history was guided by line of 11 people that has been sublime virtues, people that have basically are standing outside of the regular history the way we know that. And they believe that the last one in the line, the 12th one, disappeared as a kid more than hundreds of years ago, but they believe that he's not dead. They believe that he's actually live outside of history and is waiting for the right moment to be summoned in. By the way, it may be interesting for you to know that one of the formal titles of the current spiritual leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, is the replacer of the 12ish disappearing spiritual leader known as the Mahdi. So it shows you the very strong apocalyptic component within the Shiite belief.
And it seems to me that this is something we really need to understand here in the West. I recognize that a lot of people in America's State Department don't think that much about religion, certainly not about apocalyptic kind of visions. But if we don't understand sort of the mindset, that's going to harm our ability and really make us less effective in terms of understanding the regime that is today actually the country of Iran.
Oh, yes, this is very accurate. You know, it goes back to one of the things that I'm arguing, and that is there is a big gap between the way the Western mindset look at reality and the Middle Eastern mindset look at reality, mostly when you're talking about the Shiite one. And I argue that it's very likely that the Western mindset cannot understand and observe the mindset that actually guides and direct the Shiite belief. By the way, not only the Shiite. There are other models of behaviors or mindset of people in the Middle East that are totally alien and totally comprehensible as far as the Western mindset is concerned. So I think this is something which is enormously important, as you very accurately pointed out, to understand there is a big gap, and that gap has to be realized.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll look at Avi Melamed. And again, his book is entitled Inside the Middle East, Making Sense of the Most Dangerous and Complicated Region on Earth. And we'll come back and talk about Israel. Certainly a topic we have devoted a lot of time and attention to. But again, he brings a great perspective there as well, having even been a senior advisor to Israel's former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert when he served as mayor and, of course, lives in Israel, and can give us some of that perspective. We will take a break and then come back and continue our discussion right after this.
Point of View, Truth Team 360, Tom Fitton.
Oh yeah, I think Point of View is a good investment for those Americans concerned about getting access to important information, the information that Judicial Watch brings about its anti-corruption and government watchdog work, and the information that Point of View brings about the activities of other conservatives, and again, bringing an alternative view to the media. That's what Point of View does.
Point of View, Truth Team 360.
opportunity for you to join with us. And again, if you appreciate some of the conversation that we're having here today, certainly want to encourage you to visit our website, pointofview.net. Or, of course, we also have the pledge line, 800-347-5151. You can listen to one of the Point of View staff. That gives you an opportunity there to learn a little bit more about what they might be providing for you as well. So, again, we're going to spend a little bit of time, if we can, getting into some of the other issues. Looks like we have lost our guest, so we'll certainly want to come back to this a little bit later. But one of the issues, of course, is what is happening with the nation of Israel. And so we'll, as soon as we connect up with him, spend some time there. But just as we're waiting to connect up, let me mention again that you can join us for $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, and certainly would greatly appreciate your financial investment into Point of View. It's really as simple as calling the pledge line, 800-347-5151, or, of course, visiting the website, pointofview.net. Avi, just before we run out of time, let's, if we can, talk about Israel. We have an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You're honest enough to say that both sides might certainly be culpable, and certainly we can recognize some of the suffering on both sides. But at the same time, I recognize how vulnerable the nation of Israel is. 2 weeks from today, I'm going to be in Israel with a tour that we're bringing from Point of View. And anybody that's ever traveled in that area recognize we're talking about a country that's about the size of New Jersey, surrounded by countries that threaten its existence. So what can we do in terms of American foreign policy, and what can even our listeners do in praying for Israel? Can we do to resolve what is going to be and has been an ongoing conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
Well, Corbin, I would say that we have to adopt a different outlook regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I call it an out-of-the-box. And actually what I'm saying is that though I believe that the final objective should be a two-state solution, it's not attainable right now. It's not achievable for different reasons. Therefore, I suggest that we will approach a concept of an Israeli-Arab agreement as an interim pause that will enable Palestinians and Israelis down the road, a couple of years from now maybe, to sit down to the table and really negotiate all the conflictual issues. And there are many controversial issues that has to be discussed. Israel is, as you accurately mentioned, facing today a lot of challenges, regionally and domestically, almost in all arenas that surround Israel. You could find a lot of challenges, a lot of enemies of Israel, and we have to be very aware of it. But I think also at the same time, I think that the huge chaos that we see today in the Muslim and Arab societies in different parts of the Middle East also offers Israel a very interesting window of opportunity in my evaluation, and I hope that the political leadership will be able to know how to monetize that interesting horizon, so to speak.
You know, that out-of-box solution you're talking about, let's see if we can maybe give a little more specificity to it so people can understand. You're really talking about, if I understand it, a really kind of a treaty or an axis or an agreement, maybe is a better word, between Israel and the Arab countries, almost bypassing the Palestinians. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say bypassing the Palestinians, because obviously the Palestinians should be part of the Arab agreement. But what I'm saying is that I believe that an Israeli-Arab agreement that will include, of course, the Palestinians, will increase the odds that the Palestinians will be able to do more concessions or increase the maneuvering capacity of the Palestinians, which is today very much limited due to the inner Palestinian split between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. And I believe that if we really want to offer both people a hope and a horizon, I think that this is the time to adopt an out-of-the-box thinking. And I think that an Israeli-Arab agreement that, for example, will create a new reality in Gaza Strip that will be both positive one for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip as well as Israelis, I believe that by doing that, we will be able to create the conditions that are needed to start really dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians that will result in, hopefully, the ability to sign an agreement. Because, you know, Corbin, the issue is not signing an agreement. The issue is to sign an agreement that will endure.
That's right.
As of now, the conditions for it, unfortunately, do not exist. So we have to look at the mirror of face value and actually try to approach this out-of-the-box approach that I'm suggesting.
Again, the book is just full of those kinds of insights. It is entitled Inside the Middle East, Making Sense of the Most Dangerous and Complicated Region on Earth. And Avi, I appreciate you giving us an hour today. Thank you for writing the book. And I really encourage people to go to your website. We have a link to that website, and there are all sorts of great resources there, and also to be looking for that book in their bookstore. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Welcome, and the pleasure was totally all mine. Thank you for enabling me the stage and the opportunity.
Again, the book, which if you want to know more about, you can find out by going to the website, pointofview.net. And, of course, his website is Avi Melamed.com. And if you don't know how to spell it, we have the link there on the website, pointofview.net. Just before we go, we had last week Rebecca Hagelin in studio, actually by phone, with us, and just talking about how Point of View has been on the cutting edge. And certainly that's what we've been talking about today here on Point of View.
Oh, it's like coming home every time I'm on the show with you, Kirby, right? Because it has been a long time that I've been a supporter of Point of View. And I'm going to go ahead and say it, 30 years. As a young newlywed living in Houston, Texas, but I moved away from D.C., where I had been involved in politics for a while, and I kind of felt like Houston was a little bit of a desert experience for me, and I discovered Point of View. And Point of View provided everything I needed to really nourish me at that time in my life. It was always on the cutting edge of what was going on politically, because we know that we as Americans have a great treasure in the freedom and the Judeo-Christian values upon which our country was founded. And we know that when we get away from those values, government can become obtrusive, and it starts interfering with our religious freedom and our parental rights and our free speech. And so it's very important for Christians to know what's going on in our government and to be involved in that. And I always found that Point of View was a great place to go for truthful information. And then, of course, as a newlywed and now having been married for over 30 years, Point of View is also a great resource to go to for spiritual and family help. And so it remains a vital part of our lives, and certainly in my personal work in trying to help families strengthen their relationships with each other as well.
Rebecca Hagelin, and again, did a great job of just reminding you why we certainly support Point of View. I support it. I encourage you to do the same. And, of course, look at the impact that had. Later on, she became the vice president of the Heritage Foundation. And if you've been listening to some of the spots that Bob Allen's been providing, reminding us of Jeremy Dice, listening when he was in grade school, and now, of course, defending Dr. Eric Walsh for First Liberty. And so this is the impact that we're having. And I would, without hesitation, encourage you to join with us so that we can continue to have this impact on the next generation. You can find out more certainly by visiting the website, pointofview.net. But even though we're going off the air, you can certainly call someone on the pledge line if you'd like to join with us. 1-800-347-5151. Again, Truth Team 360, $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. And we certainly are looking for some of you to join with us and become members. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day, and we will see you back here tomorrow.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can, or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other, and I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today, pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I'm constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.